Imagine boarding a first-class flight, expecting luxury, only to be silently judged, ignored, and pushed aside. But what happens when the person you look down on ends up saving your life? This is a story about power, prejudice, and an unexpected twist that left everyone on that plane speechless. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Elias Porter sat in the plush leather seat of the American Atlantic Airways first-class lounge at JFK International Airport, a half-empty cup of coffee resting on the small table beside him. The murmur of travelers, the occasional clatter of suitcases rolling over tile floors, and the soft hum of overhead announcements created a familiar backdrop. He should have been used to this, waiting. Years of working as a cardiothoracic surgeon meant patience had become second nature to him, but this time something felt different. Maybe it was exhaustion from the 18-hour shift he had just finished, or maybe it was the subtle way some people glanced in his direction before quickly looking away. Dressed in a dark gray blazer over a navy shirt, he looked put together but not flashy. His neatly trimmed beard and strong, steady posture should have commanded respect. Yet he had lost count of the number of times people had assumed he wasn't supposed to be here. He leaned back slightly, exhaling as he scrolled through his phone. The annual cardiology conference in Miami was something he had been looking forward to. Not for the lectures, but for the chance to step away from the endless cycle of surgeries and hospital corridors. As he glanced up, his eyes met those of a middle-aged businessman sitting across from him. The man, dressed in a tailored suit, gave him a brief once-over, the kind that wasn't meant to be obvious but always was. Elias knew that look. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. A woman's voice broke through the quiet tension. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Elias looked up to find a blonde woman in her early 50s, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored blazer. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to speaking in courtrooms. "No, go ahead," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. She sat down, setting her leather tote on the floor before offering a polite smile. "Lisa Montgomery." "Elias Porter." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Doctor Porter?" Elias gave a slow nod, waiting for the usual reaction. Lisa tilted her head slightly. "I read about your research in the Journal of Cardiothoracic Medicine. Your work on minimally invasive valve repair is impressive." For a brief moment, surprise replaced the usual wariness in his eyes. He wasn't used to people recognizing him for his work, not outside of medical circles anyway. "Appreciate that," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. Lisa studied him for a second. "You ever get tired of it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" She gave a knowing smile. "Being underestimated." Elias chuckled dryly, setting his cup down. "It comes with the territory." Lisa's expression darkened slightly as she glanced toward the businessman who had been watching Elias earlier. Some people never get tired of making assumptions. Elias had learned long ago that addressing it directly never changed anything. You could correct a stranger's perception in the moment, but they'd still walk away carrying the same biases. Instead, he had chosen to let his work speak for him. An announcement rang out. "Flight 762 to Miami now boarding at Gate 17. Lisa stood first, slinging her tote over her shoulder. "Looks like it's time." Elias followed, rolling his carry-on behind him. As they moved toward the gate, he felt the familiar weight of a world that never quite saw him the way it should. But today, he wasn't in a hospital. He wasn't standing over an open chest, holding a heart in his hands. Today, he was just another passenger. Or at least that's what he thought. The first-class cabin of American Atlantic Airways, Flight 762, was quiet, filled mostly with business travelers and a few high-profile passengers. The air smelled of fresh leather and faint traces of cologne. The overhead lighting dimmed just enough to create a sense of calm. Elias settled into seat 2A, adjusting his seatbelt while a flight attendant walked past. The woman was tall, blonde, and strikingly polished, her uniform crisp and flawless. Her name tag read Madison Whitaker. He had barely registered her presence before she breezed past him, offering a dazzling smile to a man sitting across the aisle, the same businessman from the lounge. "Mr. Langston," she greeted warmly, her voice carrying a touch of practiced charm. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Langston returned her smile, barely glancing at the menu before saying, "Scotch, neat." "Of course." Elias watched as Madison turned back down the aisle, passing him without so much as a glance. He shook his head slightly, exhaling as he leaned back. It was nothing new. It wasn't the first time he had been ignored in spaces like this, and it wouldn't be the last. A few minutes later, after serving Langston his drink, Madison returned with a poised expression, finally acknowledging Elias. "Would you like something to drink?" The contrast in her tone was impossible to ignore. Polite, but mechanical. No warmth, no effortless charm like before. "Water, please," he said, keeping his voice neutral. She nodded curtly and turned away. Lisa, seated in 3B, had been watching. She leaned forward slightly. "Not subtle, is she?" Elias didn't reply, just let out a quiet breath. Minutes later, Madison returned, setting a glass of water down in front of him with a little too much force. It wasn't an accident. Elias glanced at the water before looking up at her, but Madison's face was unreadable as she moved to another passenger. Lisa muttered, "Well, that was unnecessary." Elias picked up the glass, taking a slow sip before setting it down again. "It's always unnecessary," he murmured. Lisa studied him carefully. "You're not going to say anything, are you?" "No point," Elias said simply. "People like her don't listen. They don't change." Lisa's expression hardened. "Sometimes they do, but only if someone makes them." Elias let out a dry chuckle. "Then today's not that day." As the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, Madison walked past again, this time close enough that her hip lightly bumped against his armrest. "Excuse me," she said, but her tone was anything but apologetic. Elias clenched his jaw but said nothing. The plane rumbled as it taxied down the runway, and as it lifted into the sky, a thought crossed his mind. This flight was going to be longer than expected. The plane had settled into a steady cruise, the cabin filled with the occasional clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation. Elias kept his gaze fixed on the clouds outside his window, but his thoughts were elsewhere. It was remarkable, really, how something as subtle as a delayed glance, a shift in tone, a change in body language could send a message louder than words. "You don't belong here." He had spent his life walking into rooms where people questioned his presence. In med school, in surgical theaters, even in high-level conferences where his name was printed boldly on the program, he had learned to brush it off, to let his work be the only response necessary. But there was something about this, the quiet, intentional dismissiveness of Madison Whitaker, that made it different. Maybe because there was no scalpel in his hand here, no patient in need of saving. Here, he was just a passenger, and she had decided that wasn't enough. Lisa Montgomery, seated behind him, had noticed it too. "She's going to keep doing that the entire flight, isn't she?" Lisa said under her breath, leaning slightly toward Elias. Elias sighed. "Most likely." "You sure you're not going to say something?" Elias turned his head slightly, giving her a calm look. "And say what?" Lisa frowned. "That you deserve to be treated the same as everyone else?" Elias took a slow sip of his water before responding. "I've been having that conversation my whole life. No one's listening." Lisa crossed her arms. "Maybe they'd listen if someone forced them to." Elias let out a dry chuckle. "You a lawyer or an activist?" "Both, depending on the day," she quipped. Then more seriously, "People like her get away with this because no one calls them out." Elias set his glass down and met her gaze. "Do you think if I say something, she'll suddenly realize she's wrong and change?" Lisa hesitated. "Number. But it might make her think twice before doing it to someone else." Elias leaned back in his seat, exhaling through his nose. "You assume she thinks at all?" Lisa didn't argue. Instead, she sat back in her seat, arms still crossed, frustration evident in her features. A moment later, Madison passed by again, her posture stiff, her eyes pointedly avoiding Elias. When she stopped to take another passenger's order, her entire demeanor changed, her voice taking on that artificial warmth she had so carefully withheld from him. Lisa shook her head. "Unbelievable." Elias simply looked away. He wasn't here to teach anyone a lesson. But life, as he had learned, had a way of handling that on its own. Dinner service began, and Elias knew, even before Madison reached his row, that the pattern would continue. She moved down the aisle, her smile effortlessly polite as she asked each passenger about their meal preferences. When she finally reached Elias, the smile disappeared. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked monotone, barely looking at him. Elias glanced at the tray she was holding. "What's the difference?" Madison's jaw tensed. "One is chicken, the other is pasta." Lisa, who had been watching, let out a soft scoff. Elias held Madison's gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then finally said, "Pasta." Madison set the tray in front of him a little harder than necessary and moved on without another word. Lisa leaned forward. "Wow, she really thinks she's getting away with this, doesn't she?" Elias twirled his fork between his fingers, then finally spoke. "She is getting away with it." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Before Elias could respond, a voice from across the aisle interrupted them. "Excuse me, miss?" the businessman, Mr. Langston, called out. Madison turned back instantly, her smile back in place. "Yes, sir." Langston gestured toward Elias. "I couldn't help but notice. Your service seems to be a little different for some passengers than others." Madison stiffened, the smile slipping for just a fraction of a second. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Langston gave her a look that said he wasn't buying it. "I think you do." The tension in the cabin thickened. Madison forced her smile back into place, but Elias could see the tightness in her jaw. "I treat all passengers with the same level of professionalism," she said smoothly. Lisa let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That's interesting, because I'd say you've been about 2 levels below professional since takeoff." A few heads turned. Madison's eyes flickered toward Elias, her expression unreadable, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned quickly and disappeared toward the galley. Lisa smirked. "Well, that was satisfying." Elias sighed, pushing his tray aside. "Not really." Lisa looked at him. "Why not?" "People saw it." "She knows she's been caught." Elias shook his head. "It won't change anything." Lisa's expression hardened. "Then maybe something else will." Elias raised an eyebrow, but Lisa just leaned back in her seat. Whatever she was thinking, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The hum of the engines filled the first-class cabin, a low, steady vibration that should have been comforting. But for Elias, it was just another sound blending into the growing tension that hung over the flight. Lisa had returned to her book, flipping through the pages with a little more force than necessary. Langston, the businessman, had shifted in his seat, occasionally throwing sideways glances toward the front of the cabin, where Madison had disappeared. Elias, however, remained still. He wasn't going to play into this. He wasn't going to let Madison's behavior dictate his night. He had worked too hard, endured too much, to let a flight attendant with an ego problem pull him into something he had no interest in entertaining. Yet when Madison returned, he knew immediately. She wasn't finished. She walked down the aisle, her expression composed but her steps just a little too deliberate. When she reached Elias' row, she barely slowed down, but her elbow clipped the edge of his tray, causing the water glass to tip over, spilling onto his lap. A sharp silence followed. Elias exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the armrest. "Oh," Madison said flatly, stopping just long enough to glance at the mess. "Looks like you had an accident." Lisa let out a low breath, her grip on her book tightening. Elias grabbed a napkin, dabbing at his pants with controlled movements. "Stay calm. Stay quiet. Let it go." But Lisa wasn't built that way. "That was deliberate," she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to turn heads. Madison turned to her, feigning confusion. "Excuse me?" Lisa leaned forward, her expression unreadable, but her voice sharp. "You heard me?" More passengers were looking now. A murmur passed through the row behind them. Even Langston put down his drink. Madison's face hardened. "I think you're imagining things, ma'am." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "I think you're pushing your luck." Elias finally spoke, his voice measured. "It's fine." Lisa turned to him, disbelief flashing across her face. "No, it's not." Elias met her gaze, a silent warning to let it go. "Not here. Not now." Madison, sensing victory, gave a small, satisfied smile before walking away. Lisa shook her head, muttering under her breath. She's not done. Elias knew it too. Dinner service had ended, and most of the cabin lights had dimmed. Some passengers had reclined their seats, settling in for the remainder of the flight. The quiet should have been a reprieve. But Elias knew better. Lisa had been right. Madison wasn't finished. He saw it in the way she moved, the way her gaze occasionally flicked in his direction, assessing. She wanted to see if he'd react, if he'd snap, if he'd confirm whatever preconceived image she had of him. He wouldn't. But then she made her next move. "Sir," she said suddenly, stopping next to his seat, voice coolly professional. "There's been a mistake with your ticket." Elias looked up from his book, brow slightly furrowed. "Excuse me?" Lisa, who had been on the verge of closing her eyes, immediately snapped to attention. Madison continued, her hands clasped in front of her. "It appears your seat was mistakenly assigned. We need to relocate you to another section of the plane." A beat of silence. Langston turned his head slightly, watching. Other passengers shifted in their seats. Elias exhaled through his nose. He had expected pettiness. "But this," Lisa sat up straighter. "You have got to be kidding me." Madison didn't acknowledge her. She kept her gaze on Elias, waiting. He didn't flinch. "Where exactly are you planning to move me?" "Economy," she said simply. Lisa let out a sharp laugh. Disbelief etched across her face. "Oh, you've lost your mind." Elias, however, remained calm. "I paid for this seat." Madison gave a small false smile. "There's been a mistake." Lisa scoffed. "Yeah, the mistake is you thinking anyone is going to let you get away with this." Langston, shifting in his seat, finally spoke up. "Is there a problem here, Miss Whitaker?" Madison's smile faltered for just a second. "No problem, sir. Just a clerical error." Langston's expression darkened. "You're moving him out of first class? Are you serious?" Madison straightened. "As I said, there's been a—" "You're lying," Lisa cut in. Passengers were watching now. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. Elias set his book down, finally meeting Madison's gaze with unwavering calm. "I'm not moving," he said. A muscle in Madison's jaw twitched. Lisa, leaning back, gave a satisfied smirk. "Guess that settles it." Madison's grip on her notepad tightened, but she didn't argue further. She turned sharply, walking away, her entire body rigid with frustration. Langston let out a breath. "Unbelievable." Lisa shook her head. "She just tried to kick you out of your seat, Elias." "What the hell?" Elias picked up his book again, flipping a page. "It's fine." Lisa stared at him. "No, it's really not." Elias didn't respond. He had spent years picking his battles, but something told him this one wasn't over. The cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet, but tension lingered beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. Elias turned a page in his book, but the words barely registered. His mind was elsewhere. On the way Madison had tried to remove him from his seat, on the silence that followed, on the weight of unspoken expectations. Lisa had stopped reading entirely. She sat with her arms crossed, her foot tapping against the carpeted floor. "You're really going to just sit there and pretend that didn't happen?" she finally asked. Elias didn't look up. "What would you have me do?" Lisa let out a sharp breath. "Report her, demand to speak to the captain, call her out for what she is, a racist who just tried to humiliate you in front of an entire cabin full of people." Elias slowly closed his book and turned to face her. "And then what? She gets a slap on the wrist? Maybe a half-hearted apology? Maybe nothing at all?" Lisa shook her head. "So you're just going to let it go?" Elias studied her for a moment before exhaling. "I've learned to pick my battles." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "This one picked you." Before Elias could respond, movement at the front of the cabin caught his eye. Madison had reappeared, but this time something was different. She wasn't moving with the same controlled confidence. She was stumbling. Lisa saw it too. "What the hell?" Madison reached for the back of a seat, gripping it tightly. Her posture sagged for just a moment before she straightened again, but it was clear something was wrong. The other flight attendants didn't seem to notice yet, but Elias's medical instincts kicked in immediately. He sat up, his pulse steady but alert. Then, without warning, Madison's legs buckled beneath her. Gasps filled the cabin as she collapsed into the aisle. Elias was already unbuckling his seatbelt. A ripple of panic spread through the first-class cabin as passengers turned to see Madison lying motionless on the floor. One of the flight attendants, a younger woman with wide, startled eyes, rushed forward. "Madison? Can you hear me?" No response. Elias was on his feet before anyone could process what was happening. He knelt beside Madison, his movements controlled, precise. "She's not responding," the young flight attendant said, her voice shaking. Elias placed 2 fingers against Madison's neck, searching for a pulse. Weak, thready, unstable. "She's in trouble," Elias said, already assessing the situation. "I need to know, does she have any medical conditions? Allergies?" The younger attendant hesitated. I don't know. I think she carries an EpiPen." Elias' gaze sharpened. "Anaphylaxis. Where is it?" he asked. I don't know." Lisa was already moving. "Check her pocket, her bag, anywhere." Elias gently tilted Madison's head back, checking her airway. Her breathing was shallow, labored. If this was an allergic reaction, she was running out of time. The other passengers watched, some murmuring, others frozen in their seats. The young flight attendant suddenly gasped. "We have a medical kit in the galley. Go!" Elias ordered. The attendant bolted. Lisa knelt beside him, watching Madison's unmoving face. "You don't have to do this." Elias didn't look at her. "Yes, I do." Lisa shook her head. "After everything she's done?" Elias met her gaze. His voice was steady. "She's a patient now. That's the only thing that matters." Madison stirred slightly, her lips parting as she struggled to breathe. Elias didn't hesitate. He pressed down firmly on her chest, keeping her airway open. "Hang in there," he murmured. "You're not dying on this plane." At that moment, the flight attendant came rushing back, EpiPen in hand. Elias took it, his grip firm. This wasn't about Madison Whitaker, the woman who had treated him like he didn't belong. This was about saving a life. And that, Elias knew, was something she would never be able to ignore. The cabin was silent except for the shallow, strained breaths coming from Madison. The weight of the moment pressed down on Elias as he held the EpiPen firmly in his grasp. Every part of him knew what to do. His hands had performed life-saving procedures more times than he could count. But there was a different kind of pressure here, one that had nothing to do with medicine. Madison had spent the last few hours treating him like he didn't belong, and now her life was in his hands. Lisa, still kneeling beside him, watched his face carefully. "You sure about this?" Elias didn't hesitate. He uncapped the EpiPen, rolled up the sleeve of Madison's uniform, and pressed the injector against the muscle of her upper arm. A sharp click. A quick, decisive push. Seconds stretched into eternity. Madison's body jerked slightly at the dose of epinephrine, but her breathing was still unsteady. Her skin remained an alarming shade of pale. Elias kept his focus. "Come on, breathe." A few seats away, Langston muttered, "Jesus." The passengers around them watched, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then a gasp. Madison's chest expanded sharply as air rushed back into her lungs. Her fingers twitched and her eyelids fluttered open, revealing wide, unfocused eyes. Elias checked her pulse again. Stronger now, steadying. Lisa let out a breath. "She's coming back." Madison's gaze darted around, disoriented, before finally landing on Elias. Her lips parted, but no words came. Elias pulled back slightly, his tone clinical. "You had an anaphylactic reaction. You're stable for now, but we'll need to keep monitoring you." Madison's breathing was still uneven. She blinked, struggling to process. But Elias had already turned away, addressing the younger flight attendant. "She needs oxygen. Do you have a portable tank?" Yes, I'll get it." The attendant rushed off, eager to follow his instructions. Madison swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between Elias and Lisa. But neither of them looked at her. For the first time, she was the one being ignored. The minutes that followed were a blur of movement. The flight attendant scrambled to assist. Passengers whispered in hushed tones, and Elias remained calm, methodical, detached. By the time Madison was sitting upright with an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth, color was slowly returning to her face. The immediate danger had passed. Lisa stood to stretch her legs, crossing her arms as she looked down at Madison. "How are you feeling?" Madison didn't respond right away. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of confusion, shame, and something else. Finally, she mumbled, "Better." Lisa nodded slowly. "Good. You might want to let that sink in." Madison's gaze flickered toward Elias, who was back in his seat, already flipping open his book as if nothing had happened. A heavy silence hung between them. "Why?" Madison's voice was quiet, hoarse. Elias didn't look up from his book. "Why what?" "You," she swallowed, her throat raw. "You helped me." Lisa let out a dry laugh. "You can't be serious." Madison turned to Elias, ignoring Lisa. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket they had given her. "After everything, I just don't—" Elias finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You were dying." Madison flinched at the bluntness of his tone. "That's what I do," Elias continued. "I save lives." The words hit harder than Madison expected. She had spent this entire flight believing she was better than him, believing she had the power, the control, the authority. But in the moment where it mattered most, when everything was on the line, she had been powerless, and Elias had been the one to save her. She felt a wave of something uncomfortable settle in her chest. Gratitude? Humiliation? Both? Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "Somehow, I don't think you were expecting to learn a lesson today." Madison's hands curled into fists, her knuckles turning white. Elias, meanwhile, had already returned to his book, as if she no longer existed. For the first time in her life, Madison felt small, and she hated it. Madison sat motionless in her seat, the oxygen mask still pressed to her face. The steady rhythm of her breathing filled her ears, but her mind was anything but calm. She had nearly died, and the only reason she was still sitting here, still breathing, still alive, was him. The same man she had dismissed, the man she had belittled, ignored, and treated like he didn't belong. And he had saved her without hesitation. The weight of that truth pressed down on her chest, suffocating in a way the allergic reaction hadn't been. Across the aisle, Elias sat in his seat, legs crossed, book open. He wasn't smug. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even looking at her. That made it worse. Lisa, on the other hand, was looking at her. Lisa had been watching her since she woke up, arms crossed, expression unreadable, like she was waiting to see what Madison would do next. Madison lowered the mask slightly, licking her dry lips before speaking. I need to—" Lisa tilted her head. "What? Apologize? Say thank you?" Madison clenched her jaw. Lisa held up a hand. "Save it." Madison stiffened. Lisa leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "You had every opportunity to treat him with respect, and you chose not to. You had every opportunity to see him as an equal, and you refused. But when your life was on the line, you had no choice but to depend on him, and he still saved you." Madison's stomach twisted. Lisa didn't let up. "So whatever you're about to say, it's not for him. It's for you. And I don't think you even know what to do with that." Madison's grip on the blanket tightened. Lisa sat back. "Take your time. Maybe by the time we land, you'll figure it out." And with that, she turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Madison sat there staring at her hands for the first time in her life, unsure of what to do. The rest of the flight passed in uneasy silence. Elias never acknowledged Madison again. He read his book, sipped his water, and occasionally glanced out the window as if the events of the last few hours had never happened. But they had, and Madison felt the weight of every single second. By the time the captain announced their descent into Miami, the tension in the cabin had settled into something else, a quiet understanding. Passengers had seen what happened. They had witnessed Madison's actions, Elias's grace, Lisa's confrontation, and no one, not one person, had spoken up in Madison's defense. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Madison realized something unsettling. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to be on the outside. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood, stretching, gathering their belongings. Elias took his time, placing his book neatly in his bag before rising to his feet. Madison forced herself to do the same. As she stepped into the aisle, she hesitated, watching as Elias reached for his carry-on. It was now or never. She swallowed her pride and forced out the words that had been sitting on her tongue since she woke up. Dr. Porter. Elias paused, then turned to face her. Madison opened her mouth, but when she met his eyes, calm, unreadable, completely indifferent, the words caught in her throat. She had spent the entire flight acting like he wasn't worth her time, and now she could tell he didn't care about hers. Madison started, then stopped. Elias waited. Lisa, standing just behind him, raised an eyebrow. Madison finally exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. Thank you. Elias studied her for a moment. Then with the smallest nod, he replied, Take care of yourself. And just like that, he walked past her, down the aisle, and off the plane. No anger, no lecture, no need for validation, because he had never needed anything from her, and that was what stung the most. Madison stepped off the plane into the brightly lit terminal of Miami International Airport, but the usual energy of arriving at a bustling destination didn't reach her. The hum of conversations, the shuffle of rolling suitcases, the scent of coffee brewing at nearby kiosks, none of it registered. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, a steady, unrelenting reminder that she was still here, still alive, because of him. She pulled her phone from her pocket, unlocking the screen with a swipe of her thumb. A new email notification flashed across the top. Subject, urgent, meeting with management. Her stomach sank. She barely had time to process it before she spotted two familiar figures up ahead. Lisa and Elias walking toward the baggage claim. Lisa glanced over her shoulder, locking eyes with Madison. She didn't say anything, didn't glare, didn't smirk, just watched. And then she turned away, falling back into conversation with Elias as they disappeared into the crowd. Madison's fingers clenched around her phone. She had spent her whole life believing power was about control, about who dictated the rules. But now she understood something much worse. True power was when someone didn't even need to acknowledge you. She had spent the entire flight trying to make Elias feel less than. And in the end, she was the one walking away feeling small. The email notification still hovered on her screen. She took a slow breath. It was time to face whatever was waiting for her. The headquarters of American Atlantic Airways was sleek, modern, a glass and steel structure that radiated professionalism. Madison had walked through these halls 100 times before, always with purpose, always with confidence. Not today. She sat stiffly in one of the black leather chairs in the conference room, hands clasped in her lap. Across from her sat Sarah Calloway, the airline's regional manager, reviewing a folder of documents with a cold, impassive expression. Beside Sarah sat Mark Lively, the senior HR executive. Neither of them looked pleased. Finally, Sarah closed the folder and folded her hands neatly on top of it. Miss Whitaker, do you understand why you're here? Madison swallowed. I assume it's about the flight. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. It's about more than that. We've received multiple complaints, some from passengers, some from the flight crew. A formal incident report was filed by one of your colleagues regarding your behavior toward a first-class passenger. Madison forced herself to keep her posture straight, even as shame burned in her chest. I made some mistakes. Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly. Mistakes? Mark, flipping through a page in the file, read aloud. Denying service, unprofessional behavior, an attempt to forcibly remove a passenger from first class under false pretenses, and an overall pattern of discriminatory conduct. These aren't mistakes, Madison. This is a liability for the company. Madison's throat went dry. Sarah leaned forward. Do you have any idea who Dr. Elias Porter is? A lump formed in Madison's stomach. He's not just another passenger, Sarah continued. He's one of the leading cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. His name is in medical journals, on conference panels, on research papers that save lives. And yet you decided to treat him as if he didn't belong in a seat he paid for, simply because you didn't think he should be there. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. If he had decided to file a lawsuit, this airline would be in serious trouble. Madison gripped the edge of the chair. I didn't mean, Sarah cut her off with a sharp look. Intent doesn't erase impact. Silence stretched between them. Sarah finally sighed, picking up a pen and tapping it against the table. Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending further review. You will undergo mandatory sensitivity and bias training, and the company will determine whether you will be reinstated. If this were your first offense, we might be more lenient, but this is not the first time we've had complaints about your behavior. Madison's stomach dropped. This could have cost you your career, Sarah said evenly. And honestly, it still might. Madison had no words, no defense. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. The sun was setting as Madison sat in the driver's seat of her car, parked outside the American Atlantic Airways headquarters. The orange glow of the Miami sky reflected against the windshield, casting everything in warm light. But she felt cold. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, motionless. Her mind replayed the meeting over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. If he had decided to file a lawsuit, this airline would be in serious trouble. This could have cost you your career. She had walked into that conference room thinking she could smooth things over, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to explain herself. But the truth was there, staring her down from across the table. She had done this. She had put herself here. The Madison Whitaker from 2 days ago would have called this unfair. She would have argued, found some excuse, defended herself into oblivion. But now, she let out a slow breath and whispered, I did this. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. For so long, she had believed that power meant control. Control over how she carried herself. Control over how others saw her. Control over the rules of the spaces she moved through. And yet Elias Porter had never needed control to hold power over her. He had done nothing. Nothing. And still he had managed to shatter everything she thought she knew. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The weight of it was unbearable. Then without thinking, she reached for her phone. Her email inbox was still open. She hesitated only a second before typing. To Dr. Elias Porter. Subject, I owe you an apology. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She had spent her entire life avoiding accountability, finding ways to justify herself, to walk away unscathed. She couldn't do that now. Her thumbs moved quickly before she could overthink it. Dr. Porter, I don't expect a response. I don't even know if you'll read this. But I need to say it anyway. I was wrong. Not just about how I treated you, but about everything that led me to act that way in the first place. You didn't deserve what I did, and yet when I needed help, you didn't hesitate. I will never be able to repay that. She stared at the words. They weren't enough. They never would be. But they were a start. She hit send. Then she sat back and closed her eyes. Elias sat in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The hum of Miami's night air drifted through the open window. He wasn't thinking about Madison Whitaker. Not really. She had been a moment in time, a situation handled, an equation solved. He had encountered people like her before, and he would again. So when he saw her name in his inbox, he nearly ignored it. But something made him pause. With a sigh, he clicked it open. As he read, his expression didn't change. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. He didn't know what he had expected. An excuse, a half-hearted attempt at saving face. Instead, he found something rare, something real. He closed the laptop without responding. Some things didn't need a reply. Some things just needed to be understood. And maybe, just maybe, Madison Whitaker had finally learned how to listen. And that's the real lesson here. Power isn't about control. It's about character. Madison Whitaker spent an entire flight believing she was above someone, only to realize in the most humbling way possible that true strength lies in how we treat others. But here's the question. Do people truly change, or do they just feel guilty? If you were in Elias' position, would you have saved her, or would you have let her face the consequences of her own prejudice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. And if you want more stories that challenge perspectives and reveal unexpected truths, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the next one.